Hello. Welcome to a special election edition of Represent NYC, presented by Manhattan Neighborhood Network in partnership with the League of Women Voters of the City of New York. I'm Ben Max, executive editor of Gotham Gazette, an award-winning publication that covers New York policy and politics. Ahead of New York's September 9th Democratic primary elections, we're sitting down with the candidates running in the State Assembly and State Senate races to talk about their qualifications, legislative ideas, and the key issues faced by residents of Manhattan. Today, we welcome the Democratic candidates who are running to represent New York State's 76th Assembly District, which includes the Upper East Side and Roosevelt Island. Ed Hartzog, Gus Christensen, David Menegon, and Rebecca Seawright. Thank you all for being here. So we're going to go right into some conversation, and I think the first thing that I want to make sure that viewers who might not be so familiar with the subject get familiar with is what exactly does an assembly member do? How do you see the role? And what makes you qualified for it? But first, what is an assembly member, and what does that role entail in your eyes? Want to start us off, Rebecca?
Sure. Ben, thank you for having me here today. It's such an honor to be here to discuss my candidacy for the New York State Assembly. I've been Chief of Staff to a former state legislator for 5 years, have worked for 2 congressmen, a U.S. Senator, a former Assistant District Attorney in Kings County, and an administrative law judge. And I see the role of a state legislator as 2 things: passing good laws for their district and their community, and also providing constituent services. And right now on the Upper East Side, the Speaker recently closed the Capitol and District Office, so we have no constituent services. And it's so important to be the voice of the people that elect you and put you there. So providing constituent services and passing good legislation, teaming up with the other elected officials to co-sponsor bills and sponsor your own bills for the needs of the community.
Thanks. How do we see the role of an assembly member?
It's very important to have people with experience, leadership experience, understand the people in the community, and provide constituent services. Rebecca is right. You need somebody to be an advocate and give a voice to people who don't ordinarily have one. In the State Assembly, we need representation where we are concerned about our seniors. We ensure that they have a good quality of life. They have a place to live. We work with developers to make sure that we have a long-term strategic plan to make sure that people on fixed incomes can live. We also have to prioritize our education system. The remediation rate at SUNY is $70 million a year. So we understand that there are issues in our high schools and education that we need to invest in, so we don't have to spend so much money to teach students what they haven't learned before. In Albany, you will pass legislation and work with other legislators to come up with a plan, get consensus, and represent the people in your district.
Gentlemen?
Well, first of all, thanks, Ben, for having us here, and Rebecca and Dave and Gus and the League of Women Voters and everybody who's watching at home. I think my colleagues are right. Look, it's constituent services, but it's, as a member of the community board now and going into my 4th year, I think we've hit the nail on the head. It's about community, and it's about representing the issues that affect our community locally at the state level. And that means, with respect to education, making sure that we have the steady funding necessary to have the pre-K seats that we need, because we have more young families in our district, we have more seniors, and making sure we have money for that, but also have money for after-school programs. Roosevelt Island definitely is a community in our district that needs that kind of help as well. It's also talking about transportation issues at the state level. And one thing that I've been talking about is the need to create open and green space. We certainly are last in the city by a lot, and again, it's a quality of life issue. And as Dave alluded to before, it's working with developers. We see it every day. We open up the paper and we see folks in Brooklyn, Staten Island, other boroughs, developing along the riverfront and working with developers to provide a place where people can go and feel, again, a community. And I hear so much of that on the street and from folks at the community board. They feel they're losing it.
So we'll definitely come back to some of these issues. Gus, I wanted to give you a chance to chime in on the
I mean, look,
role.
I don't disagree with anything my colleagues here have said. The way I would put it slightly differently is that problem solving is critically important. I mean, nobody knows the needs of a district, of a community better than its own legislators, its own hardworking legislators directly representing the community, living in it, talking to people, getting feedback every day. And so a number of the issues that we've all mentioned, education, school construction, our parks and our green spaces. These are things where we have problems, and a lot of them are real estate related problems, and we have, our district comprises some of the most congested zip codes in the country, and so real estate is extremely expensive and it's difficult, but that's why we have legislators to help solve problems, to work with the school construction authority, to work with the Parks Department to deliver the schools, the green space, et cetera, that people need.
So there's this dual role of legislator up in Albany and also constituent services that you all sort of hit on and Rebecca first outlined. And so as a potential member of the Assembly, 150 members to the body, when it's full at least, how do you go up to Albany? How do you make things happen there that can benefit your constituents and be good for the state? You know, what is that piece of the job? What is that going to take, and how are you most able to go to Albany and get laws passed that are for the benefit of your community and the state as a whole?
Well, I'll start down here then. I feel like I've been doing a lot of that on the community board. You know, we have a very, as some would say, a robust debate at community board every month. But look, we will disagree on issues. But I think over the few years that I've been serving now, that there's a way to disagree about how we should move forward without being disagreeable. And I think in a legislature, especially in a political atmosphere that is as partisan nationally, statewide as we have, it's important to be able to work with people who you may not always agree with on a particular issue, but know that the next day, the next week, you may be agreeing with them on another issue. So it's finding that consensus, as we talked about, and having that kind of experience.
Other thoughts on the subject?
We're very polite. We like to go
Yeah,
in
no,
order
that's,
here.
I mean, this is
Best to start it
I mean,
out.
if that feels most comfortable, go for it. We can, you know.
No. I mean, look, Ed's absolutely right. You have to be able to work with other legislators. You have to be able to work with other legislators, you know, from Manhattan, from New York City, but also from the suburbs and from more rural areas of the state, from Western New York. And you've got to be able to see problems and how they affect not just your own community, but how they affect other communities around the state. And I think that kind of, you know, being able to look at all sides of a problem, see what other people's points of view are, and help craft legislation that's meaningful both in extremely congested areas like the Upper East Side of Manhattan, but that also may well be meaningful in extremely rural areas of Central and Western New York.
Mm-hmm.
What makes me unique as a candidate, and I think will be very helpful in Albany, is I have a very broad background. I've been an executive at Xerox Corporation. I've also been a small business owner. I understand the needs of a small business that doesn't want to have a lot of red tape, that needs to take care of their employees. I'm also a veteran. I actually did 2 tours in Iraq where I did development, building schools, hospital, infrastructure. I got 3 Bronze Stars in Iraq, not for fighting, but for my ability to get people that are not predisposed to work together and often kill each other to sit down at the table, think strategically what we need to do for education, infrastructure projects, and put a plan in place and get it done. And I've also been an advocate for after-school programs for children. 15 years I've dedicated 2 nights a week to ensure that children in this city from different socioeconomic backgrounds have a place to go and learn about leadership and learn about community service.
So if you can get folks working together overseas, maybe in Albany we can get people working together a little bit more.
Some people say I need 3 tours in Iraq in order to get myself prepared for Albany.
We'll get back to some of the Albany specific issues in a moment, but in terms of being able to go and get legislation passed or work on that, what are your thoughts?
Well, thank you. I think it's important to have a strong coalition building and negotiating skills, and I'm happy to have been endorsed by our Assemblyman to the west, Dan Quart, our Assemblyman to the north, Robert Rodriguez, our state senators Liz Kruger and Jose Serrano. So as a lifelong Democrat, attorney, and activist, I would go to Albany and build coalitions around legislation that's good for this district and team up with some of the champions that are already there to help me pass legislation.
So let me follow up on that real quick. So these elected officials who represent the surrounding area, why have they gotten behind you, would you say?
I think they jumped behind my candidacy very early, as well as Gail Brewer, Scott Stringer, and Tish James, because they see me as the most qualified candidate in this race. I've spent a lifetime in public service as an assistant district attorney, drafting legislation as chief of staff to a state legislator. working for 2 congressmen and a U.S. senator in Washington. And I've really devoted my life to public service and would love to go to Albany, currently serve on Community Board 8, and extend that service to the state legislature. And I'm honored to have their endorsement.
So in terms of going to Albany and some of the dynamics there, right? So I was sort of alluding to that before. So we have, you know, what's been going on in the state Senate with the Independent Democratic Conference, and they've made promises to return to the mainline Democrats, but we're going to obviously see how that plays out after the elections. So a lot of New Yorkers, I think, who either pay attention or don't really feel like Albany's working as well as it could. Thoughts on that, ways to make both the Assembly and the state Senate work better and work better together? What can we do to sort of improve government function out of the state?
Sure.
Albany is completely dysfunctional, and I think what we need to do is have campaign finance reform. We need to be able to have good candidates be able to get in front of the people and get their message out. I also believe that we need to have term limits. It should be a full-time job because it's so much of constituent services. I believe that it should be term limits. Nobody should be up in Albany 40 years. And I believe this republic will survive, and New York City will survive in the state if we rotate qualified people through Albany.
So make it a full-time job would include paying more, I would assume?
Yes, it should.
Yeah.
It should pay more. And I think it should be the only income that you receive unless it's from some retirement, other income such as that. And it should be term limited.
So term limits and full-time job, but raise the pay. Any disagreement there on those two? Feelings on term limits?
You know, the campaign finance reform point that David made, I think, is critically important. We need a system statewide, similar to the system we have in the city with matching funds and good spending limits. We also need redistricting reform, for example. We do need to make sure that district lines are fairly drawn, that we don't gerrymander one house to favor one party, the other house to favor the other party. We do need to make sure that the population of all of the districts is the same, which it is not currently. You know, we need to have, as David said, not just a full-time job, but more critically, the barrier on the conflicted outside employment. So, you know, the vast majority, I firmly believe, of members of our state Senate and state Assembly are honest women and men who are trying to do hard work on behalf of their constituents. But clearly there is a significant minority that is in office for their own personal gain. And I think that it's not just what goes on that's illegal. A huge part of the problem is what goes on that is currently legal. It's taking professional services, wages and fees from outside employers who are getting a lot of their revenue from companies and institutions that have business before the state.
Right, a whole host of issues that
and
reformers want to change about the system.
The kind of conflict of interest laws that we have in Albany are way, way too lax.
No, I think that's right. We've hit the nail on the head, and it is. It's about rebuilding trust, though, Ben. You're right in the system because you know that kind of constant parade of politicians that are arraigned, indicted, convicted for just the kind of shenanigans that Dave and Gus and Rebecca have talked about. It stems from campaign finance reform. It's absolutely right. We need to make it a full-time position and make it devoid of outside income because, as you know, Republicans and Democratic members of the Assembly freely say it is a full-time job, as we've been talking about, and I don't understand how you can have that outside income and make it a full-time job. And with respect to that, one thing I've said is we're not going to spend more than $250,000 in the race because you need to walk the walk in terms of the spending on that. And I think we also need to address the system overall with respect to the financing of it.
Did either of you guys want to weigh in on term limits or passing on that one? David had brought up term limits.
No, I think term limits are actually working extremely well in the city, and I think it's taken a couple of election cycles to see it. But I think one of the most critical differences you see is how much younger the city council is now. And
it's not. So you're yes on term limits. I'm sorry to
Yeah.
cut you off, but I want to make sure we get to Rebecca.
Yeah,
term
I'm
limits.
yes on term limits.
I'm not. The term limits wasn't the first thing that I think in terms of securing the system. I'm not per se for term limits. It's something I wouldn't be opposed to, but I think really to get to the nub of the issue, it's the campaign finance. Because look, one of the issues that affects our community, just for a second, Ben, that didn't touch on was the Erstat law. I mean, it's
Let's
just
come back to that in a second.
that affects it. So I think that's really where you get to the issue.
I strongly support campaign finance being passed at the state level, and I would love to team up with Senator Luz Kruger, who's endorsed me and has been a champion and a strong voice for campaign finance. In order to create an equal playing field where all men, women, and transgendered people have an opportunity to run for office, qualified people, and win, we have to pass campaign finance law at the state level. Something else that I'm very passionate about is the Women's Equality Bill. New York State ranks 33rd in the nation on the number of women in political office in the New York State Legislature. 1 in 5 right now is a woman in the New York State Assembly. And Mr. Menegon, Mr. Christensen, Mr. Hartzog will all tell you they support the need for more women in elected office, just not in the 76.
Not in this race necessarily.
Not in the 76 Assembly District. So I think we need to elect more women to create an equal playing field, and we need to pass campaign finance reform. My candidacy is about running as a reform candidate to overhaul the system in Albany. We need to make changes.
Okay. And for you, term limits?
Totally support it.
Support term limits, okay. And so we hit on outside income, and so, you know, it's worth a shot from my perspective to bring this up, which is, you know, the reports about the speaker and his massive amounts of outside income and sort of the general support for Speaker Silver among assembly members and folks where there's been scandals over the years of various kinds, including related to the current assembly member in this district. So, you know, this all very much relates. How do you see, you know, obviously the issue of outside income directly relates to the speaker and his amount of outside income and also his leadership. Where do you stand on Speaker Silver, and what do you think needs to happen, you know, moving forward with assembly leadership if you're there or if you're not there? Now, this is one nobody wants to go first, I'm sure, but thoughts on it?
I have no problem with that.
Sure.
I have, you know, when you have money involved in anything, there's always going to be some type of self-interest and corruption. And I'm kind of an expert on it. You know, I've gone to Bosnia, Cuba, Kosovo, 2 tours in Iraq. So I fully understand that when there's money involved in projects, it does corrupt people. I think that we need to remove the money interest out of Albany. It's out of hand. And I think people in this state have lost faith that their representatives are representing themselves more than their constituents. And I think all of us here at this table want to reform that. And I believe the best way is to have campaign finance reform, getting good people in front of the constituents, and having term limits. That's the way you're going to, you know, stop this ship with 3 people steering it.
Thoughts on assembly leadership?
I think we absolutely must hold our elected officials to a higher standard. We need more accountability, more transparency. We need to look at the Board of Elections, and we need to look at self-financing of candidates, of campaigns. We have to have accountability at the state level and transparency, and that's what I would advocate for.
Gentlemen?
Well, look, I think the idea of a citizen legislature is best embodied in one where we do have real campaign finance reform. You know, I'm not. We talked about term limits and campaign finance reform. You know, what worries me going to a legislative body is that someone ties the two together in a bill that becomes unpassable for reasons people, you know, find a way to kill the bill because of both. But I think, again, it's the campaign finance that takes the incentive to stay up in Albany. It shouldn't be one of these lifetime jobs. It should be one where you want to serve the public. It's public service. So you take some time, you serve the public, and so it should be a natural kind of flow, as Dave was alluding to before, where, you know, it's not the kind of job where you can be making $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 a year, right? They made it $79,500 for a reason, and that was so that, you know, you need to get back out there. If you have a family, you know, if you have a youngster, you're trying to put it through college, you know, I need to go back to work in the private sector. That's great, because somebody who's been out in the community now comes to the public sector and understands what it is the public wants. And so I think that's the kind of cleansing I think we need.
Okay. Gus, did you want to?
Look, I mean, I agree with a lot of what everyone else is saying and what I've said before. We need campaign finance reform. We need electoral reform, you know, and we need to push it through.
So let's start with you on a new line then. So let's get into some more specific priorities. Ed had started to bring up the Erstad Law and affordable housing. Rebecca brought up Women's Equality Act. So let's talk, you know, what do you see as a main sort of district priority, legislative priority for yourself if you were to be elected? You know, what would be sort of what's on your campaign literature? What are your top issues?
When I look locally in the district, I think the most critical issue facing our district is the 91st Street Marine Transfer Station that the city is trying to build right now. I've been a leader of the civil disobedience efforts against it and the movement against it, and I think it's critically important that we do stop it. I think it's wrong for the district, and I think it's wrong for the entire city. It is going to dramatically increase the cost of disposing of Manhattan's solid waste, and that's something that is borne by all taxpayers citywide, not just the residents of Manhattan. It is going to double down on a backward-looking strategy of moving everything to landfill. And so I believe very firmly that it's something we have to stop, and that I have a viable and good alternative plan for what the city should be doing in terms of focusing its investment on recycling efforts, and in terms of transitioning the city's garbage truck fleet to low and no emission vehicles, electric and compressed natural gas garbage trucks.
And this is something you'd work with the city on.
Well, I believe that these should be statewide mandates as well. I think that if, for example, electric and compressed natural gas low emission garbage trucks are good for the city, they're good for the entire state. They're being used now in some suburban areas of the state, places like Smithtown, Long Island. And not only are they vastly better from an emissions perspective, they're actually very cost effective. The operating costs are so much lower that city and state governments can save money on them. And having the critical mass of as many of the trucks being purchased as possible drives down the acquisition costs.
Okay, so obviously a focus for everyone here on the transfer station, but other issues to bring to the fore. David, did you want to mention something?
It's the quality of life for our seniors. We have 1 million seniors over the age of 65, and in 15 years we'll have 2 million. So we have to make sure that we have a plan that they can stay in their homes. We need to build more affordable housing. I believe the 50-30-20 split is the best way to go, 50% market rate, 30% middle income, and 20% low income. We need to integrate people into buildings. It's not a good idea to have just low affordable housing as a separate unit somewhere on the outskirts, and they're going to have a security guard, not a doorman. So that's a priority. Seniors also are very concerned about safety on the streets. We have bike lanes, which I support as a public member of the Transportation Committee, but they're unsafe, and we have to ensure that bicyclists are educated, they know how to use the roads, and seniors are protected. And we have to protect the services that they have. More library hours and senior centers to provide food. We have a lot of seniors that live under the poverty line, and we have to care for them.
So we're getting into a lot of different topics here, which is great. Yeah. Did you want to speak more either about what you had mentioned earlier or something different?
The waste transfer station is something that I am strongly opposed to. I've stood on the fields of the soccer fields at Asphalt Green as a PTA mom, PS6, where my kids went to school. Have their field day every year right there on Asphalt Green, and my kids have gone to summer camp there and play ball there, and we have to do everything in our power to stop the waste transfer station. One of the things I want to do, if elected in Albany, is fight to be on the Environmental Affairs Committee, which oversees and has oversight of the Department of Environmental Conservation, to force that agency to hold a hearing to deny the permit so the construction can't go forward. The other two things that are...
So that's something concrete that can be done to perhaps stop this from
Absolutely,
happening.
absolutely. The state legislature has oversight, and that particular committee in the Assembly has oversight over that state agency, the Department of Environmental Conservation. The other thing is affordable housing. As I campaign on the streets every single day, I'm hearing more and more horror stories from seniors, from tenants that are telling me they're being bullied by their landlords and they're threatened that they're going to lose their homes and their apartments. And I think we have to do more. I've been endorsed by the Tenants PAC and feel that I could be a very strong voice for affordable housing.
So what do they want to see, the Tenants PAC, or what would you want to see in terms of
I would want to
making that
repeal the
happen?
Erstead law, give the power back to the municipalities, help the people on Roosevelt Island. There's 2 buildings now that are coming out of the Mitchell-Lama program. Fight for these tenants to have a right so they don't feel bullied and threatened and they can remain in their homes.
And this is something you had brought up, Ed. Do you want to
pick
up on that?
Absolutely right. Look, I mean, people feel like they're being priced out of the community. And, Rebecca, now alluding to Roosevelt Island, I'm glad she brought it up because, let's remember Roosevelt Island is part of this district, and it's a very unique place. I've grown to really love it. It's part of Community Board 8. We go out there, have meetings, and I love taking the tram. But it's a place that the land is owned by the city, but it's run by the state. It's actually run by REOC, which is the Roosevelt Island Operating Corporation, which is an authority. And there's an issue of self-governance out there that I think we can directly affect as an assembly member. But something else that's going on in the community that's affecting the entire city, actually, is the Cornell Tech project out there on the southern end of the island. That's a 30-year project. And, on Community Board 8, we've been talking about the way that project is coming online, how we're going to be able to handle the 2,000 additional people coming out to that island. If you get on the F train out there, I've said in a joking manner that it's a little bit like that Flintstones episode episode where you're pushing people under the train and the tram is packed, to the gunwales, as they say. And the thing is, you need ferry service out there, is the point. And I think that would open up transportation alternatives for the Upper East Side as well. We had ferry service over there in the 80s. I think the time is right to do it again. But that's another issue, that in addition to the ones we've already talked about, that I think we need to be addressing.
More attention to Roosevelt Island.
Well, that has a particular issue, a particular interplay with the assembly member, because it's run by the state, and the assemblyman obviously is a state official.
Right. Go ahead.
And I just want to throw one more issue out there for tenants. I think we've all heard a lot of stories, both anecdotally and I think increasingly statistically, about tenant harassment by landlords as market rents go up so rapidly in Manhattan and around the city. I think that it's critically important that we have a right to an attorney in housing court. It's a relatively new idea. People are starting to push for it at the city level. I think it's important to get it at the state level. So the same way that a criminal defendant has a right to an attorney in criminal court, I believe that tenants who are being harassed by their landlords should have a right to an attorney in housing court as well.
I believe the city's looking at
They
legislation.
are. The city is looking at legislation on that, and
you want
I
to
think
take
it's
that
something that we should take statewide.
Right,
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. And other issues that we haven't mentioned that are particularly important to the district? I don't think we've touched much on education thus far. What are some things related to that are perhaps state level things, or things that could happen in the district that you're eyeing on the education front?
We need more schools on the Upper East Side. As a public school parent and co-chair of the PS6 PTA Alumni Committee, I've seen firsthand the overcrowded classrooms and the need for additional resources. And the Education Committee in the State Assembly is something that I would want to be appointed to fight for more funding and create more schools on the Upper East Side.
Is there space for that?
We'll have to find space.
Well, and I actually
We
have
can
a
put it
plan.
in some pop-up buildings if we have to, but we have to fight for more schools.
I actually have a plan for finding more space, and I disagree with the pop-up schools. Look, I actually attended New York City Public Schools. I went to PS 321 in Brooklyn, and when I was a child in the 1970s in Brooklyn, they put a mini school up in the backyard of PS 321. It was supposed to be there for a handful of years because there was an echo boom surge in population. Well, 35 years later, not only is there still an aluminum shed in the backyard of that school, it's now gone to 2 stories. It's twice the size, and that's not the answer for New York City public school children. We need real quality modern classroom space, and the plan that I'm advocating for is that we're going to see a tremendous wave of development along 2nd Avenue as the 2nd Avenue subway line comes to completion over the next 2 years, and we're already seeing landlords emptying out smaller buildings and apply for demolition permits. What we need on 2nd Avenue is mandatory inclusionary zoning. The value of properties along 2nd Avenue have dramatically increased because of investment by the people. Over $15 billion has been invested in the 2nd Avenue subway, and that money comes from taxpayers. And the benefits of it should not be reaped just by landlords who own property along it, where property values have dramatically increased. So we are absolutely justified to go to mandatory inclusionary zoning along 2nd Avenue, and that will yield not just affordable housing and senior housing, but also critically the ability to get mixed-use developments in there and get a series of small community schools built along 2nd Avenue in the bases of some of the new towers.
So you mandate that any new towers have school space?
Mandatory inclusionary zoning can be met with a variety of uses that serve the community. Okay. Affordable
Mixed
housing
use.
is primarily what people talk about, and that is critically important. But we can get more than affordable housing. We can also get municipal facilities, and critically most important for our neighborhood, that would be school space.
On the education front, initiatives?
Well, I think that's right. I mean, we need to obviously find space. We're at a loss for middle school seats right now, and we didn't get any pre-K seats in the north and 57th in our education council. So we need to find a way in Albany to work with the city, with our council members, with the mayor, to find space as we deal with all the education issues in the city, because I think that's a critical issue everywhere, not just in this district.
Mm-hmm.
Education is very important. I'm a product of public schools myself, and I've run an after-school program for children for 15 years, 2 nights a week, and I see the city through the eyes of the parents. And I've heard a lot of complaints that they don't have enough after-school programs. Talented and gifted, the performing arts, and special needs. Special needs is very, very, very important for the children. I think that we need to make this investment and move forward.
So Now the mayor obviously is so let's talk a little bit about sort of constituent services, because things that are happening on the city level obviously then come under an assembly member's purview when things are being rolled out, when there's things like after school programming that the mayor's ramping up, or pre-K that we've talked about. So in terms of constituent services, and Rebecca mentioned earlier that the current assembly members' offices have more or less been closed, and have been closed, and constituents in the district are not getting the same representation that they have in the same services, at least from the assembly member. Of course, the state senator and council member can pick up some of the slack. But what are the biggest needs you're seeing on a day-to-day basis in the community in terms of constituent services and people in the community not necessarily getting the attention they've needed over the last several months?
Sure. One critical thing is the expansion of SCREE that's been recently passed by the state legislature. Seniors have a lot of questions about it, and a whole very large new group of people is now eligible for it, as the income limits have moved up from $20,000 to $50,000, and that's thousands of people in our district. And they have a lot of questions, and they need a lot of help in applying. And that's a prime example of a critical constituent service function. You have a change in state law, and you have the people who are best positioned to explain it and help their constituents with it are the legislators who are involved with it. There isn't a huge existing bureaucracy to explain those rule changes, and so having a good constituent service on that issue would be critically important.
Navigating what affordable housing is available to people is very complicated. There should be a centralized database on a state level and a city level, where somebody fitting a certain criteria by age, veteran, handicapped, go to one central database, understand the services, and get housing.
I'm just going to interject real quick.
Sure.
It's about information, and it's something we hear about. I've heard about on the community board now going on 4 years. It's so often in the community, people just haven't heard about it. They come to the community board meeting, and there's a matter before us on a land use issue or something close to people's heart, and they show up and they have a question about it or a concern, and they say, we just found out about this yesterday or the other day. And what you're talking about in terms of constituent services, there are so many issues. There are just a variety of them. I think what we need to do is be proactive and maybe work with our city council members to be out in the district, say every week, opening up office hours in different locations so people can come and share all kinds of issues. Look, housing is a major issue, especially for seniors, but there are so many other issues regarding transportation or schools, and having a regular place or a revolving place throughout the district where we could unite some of our partners at the state level and city level to interact with the constituents on a weekly
more office
basis.
hours. We're hearing, an online database.
Providing more legal services. Currently, Assemblyman Dancourt provides a free housing clinic offering legal advice. If I'm elected, that's something that I would want to do, is team up with the CUNY School of Law, where I chair the board, and have students and professors offer free legal advice for tenants on the Upper East Side, and also elder law for our seniors that are threatened and feeling bullied, as well as our parents. And I've seen firsthand how it is to navigate the public school system. We need more specialized high schools. Parents very often get a letter from the Department of Education that it's the first day of school and their child hasn't been assigned a public school yet, and it's a horror and a nightmare. And so we need to provide more constituent services in the public education field.
And you'd want to see, you said, additional specialized high schools.
Absolutely.
That's a need in this community.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So we have a question from the League of Women Voters, and it deals with income inequality. The League of Women Voters question is, what can you do on the state level as a state assembly member regarding income inequality that encourages more opportunity, but also encourages economic growth? So
I've got to go right after this. I mean, look, I don't know. I assume that everyone read the article in the New York Times yesterday about the single mother in San Diego who was unable to make ends meet or even have a permanent place to live with her young child because of her inability to find stable hours and a good job. And I think that article encapsulated why I'm running for public office, and I think that there are a number of very concrete things that we absolutely have to do at the state level in order to assist in bringing up the the working people and working families of this city, adding stability to their lives and increasing the opportunities available to their children. And so that means dramatically increasing the minimum wage to $10 or $11 an hour at the state level, with a 30% flex for individual municipalities to raise it further. I think we should be shooting for $15 an hour within a couple of years. I think that we should be dramatically expanding the earned income tax credit. And I think that we need an additional modern layer of labor law. So for example, issues again highlighted just recently in the New York Times, employers should not be able to send workers home once they've shown up for a shift. When hours have been posted, when workers have come up for a shift, employers should not be able to send them home before the end of their shift because business is slow. Hours should be legally mandated to be posted a full week in advance. And if we can work through on issues like that, I think we can do a lot to, at the income level, help stabilize the lives of working families.
A living wage is very important. We have a lot of inequality in pay for women by 25%, particularly for tipped workers. 3/4 of the tip workers are women, and 20% of them live in poverty. And then half are single mothers. We need to prioritize in Albany having a living wage and ensuring that mothers will be able to provide for their children.
So what would that mean numerically? So Gus had brought up $10 or $11 immediately, state minimum wage, maybe getting up to 15.
I believe in a living wage of $15.
Statewide?
I do.
I totally support raising minimum wage up to $15 an hour, and you know, we have to do more. There are people right here in Yorkville on Roosevelt Island that are suffering, and we must fight to raise the minimum wage in Albany and also allow for municipalities to raise it even higher.
I agree. No, look, I think we do need to raise it, but I think Gus alluded to it earlier. Look, New York City is a high-cost geographic area, as we all know. But what it costs here and what it costs in Ithaca or Corning or Jamestown or Syracuse or Rochester or Buffalo, it'll vary in terms of the cost of living. So I think Gus is right in terms of having that manageability among municipalities. But look, we're talking about the macroeconomic economy. When I was in graduate school at Syracuse, getting my master's in environmental economic policy and talking about sustainability, using green economies moving forward. It's a macro issue. So we need to also partner with our Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney, who secured the funding for the Second Avenue subway, because that's the kind of long-term project that provides the economic sustainability for the businesses, for the construction workers that are there, for the infrastructure, for our transportation needs long-term. So I think it's not just looking at the state level, because I don't know what we can do statewide, but at the national level also, working with our national leaders to help out.
Why don't you, let's come, well, go ahead. I want to come back to the Second Avenue
more,
subway.
two more quick points on this there. We need to pass single-payer health care at the New York State level, and it critically relates to this issue because a huge part of the problem for working families and minimum wage workers is the incentive that employers have to keep them to part-time basis and not allow them to work enough hours to get to full-time employment. And part of the reason why employers do that is because of the benefits that a worker would get if they got to full-time. And so we need to remove that incentive from employers to keep workers on a part-time basis. And part of that is having single-payer health care. And that is something that we can and should do here in New York State, even if we can't do it on a national level.
Would that be following the Massachusetts model? Is the Affordable Care Act not taking care of those issues?
Well, it's not a single-payer system.
Right.
The Affordable Care Act is a system of mandates and incentives to push people into private plans. I think that we should have a single-payer system in New York. I think Dick Gottfried has a very good bill for it, and I would support it.
Other thoughts on economic inequality, opportunity? On the Second Avenue subway, so how would you characterize what's happening right now, what needs to be happening? How is the construction affecting residents? This goes back to, again, constituent services. What needs to happen in Albany and what needs to happen here in the city to make this go well?
We have to make sure that it's still funded. Carol Maloney's done a very good job on the federal level to do that. But the biggest concerns I've heard on the Transportation Committee as a public member is the air quality. When they do the construction, we have to do constant monitoring. We have to ensure that the trucks adhere to the regulations that we've put in place to ensure that we protect the people in the community.
Air quality, yeah. And you were going to say?
I use the subway almost every single day, and my family does, and it's so important that we hold the engineer accountable and that we keep the 2nd Avenue subway construction on schedule. And Congresswoman Maloney has done a fabulous job in getting us the funding. And we need to fight for this to go on to phase 2. One of the things I would like to do in my campaign is publish the construction schedule so that we can show these people that I live right off of 2nd Avenue, that it is on schedule now and we need to keep it on schedule. Businesses are suffering all along 86th Street. I've talked to different restaurants and merchant owners that have said to me that they don't know what they're going to do. We need more grant money to help them stay in business.
That's something I'm particularly interested in. What's happening to the local businesses who, while the construction's happening, are struggling?
Well, it's interesting. I literally, our apartment looks out over 2nd Avenue, so I see the traffic jams. We've all been in them, and look, it's like a ghost town out west in a movie theater, in a Western movie. It's just empty storefront after empty storefront, and now, we're trying to catch up. We're playing reactive here, but in terms of thinking ahead, it's, as Gus has alluded to earlier, it's about finding a way to integrate those family businesses back into the community. Again, they shouldn't have to lose out because an improvement has been made to the district, but to the point of the 2nd Avenue subway specifically, look, we have several phases, and we're in phase 2, and the next one will go north. The next phase will go north, phase 2, from 96 to 125th. But I think we need to be pushing more for phase 3 in terms of further downtown as well. In addition to which, I took the tour a couple of months ago, and what the chief engineer was telling us is that to have the money now and available would be able to capture some efficiencies, because these crews have been working now for 8-10 years down there, and they've gotten better and more efficient at it. So if we have that money available, we just keep them working at it and finally finish it, since we've been talking about it for so long.
The money is being made. Sometimes I wonder who does and doesn't read the newspapers. The money is being made available. The MTA earlier this week announced that they put $1.5 billion in their capital plan to continue phase 2 to the north of our district, and there is a concrete path to getting federal funds in a 2-to-1 ratio on top of that to deliver the amount of money that's going to be needed to extend to phase 2 over the next 3 to 5 years after the completion of phase 1.
So things look like they're heading in the right direction.
The MTA announced it is in the capital budget this year.
Well, that's
will they stay on budget, or will they need more?
That's always a huge question.
Right,
yeah.
exactly.
I mean, any of these capital projects, right? I mean, almost without exception, go way over budget. Yeah. Now, why wasn't more done to protect the businesses that were there? How did that seem to slip through the cracks? I mean, what happened?
Look,
I mean, why are there all these?
There were a couple of different bills that were introduced at the city level and the state level, none of which actually ended up passing. There were some bills. There was one bill that passed the Assembly, one bill that passed the Senate, and they were not reconciled. And with the loss of effective leadership in our Assembly district, we kind of lost some steam on that issue, I think. There's still a number of businesses that do absolutely deserve our support to carry them through to the end, but we've already lost so many. It's been several years of construction already, and the time has passed for several businesses, for the majority of the businesses that were most deeply affected and can't survive.
I haven't seen anything on this. Are there lawsuits coming?
The 2nd Avenue Merchants Association has formed, and they're giving these businesses help and trying to get them grant money. And I've been meeting with the merchants up and down 2nd Avenue and their association to try to fight for more funding and more grant money. And I just spoke with Assemblyman Dan Court yesterday about his legislation in Albany to try to deliver more grant money to these businesses, and that's what we have to work for in the next legislature.
And I think even more importantly, we also need to preserve what we have and save some of the businesses that are struggling, and we also need to look forward to what the urban fabric is going to be like after completion. So this goes back to my plan for a special economic development zone along 2nd Avenue. We talked about one critical aspect of it earlier, to have mandatory inclusionary zoning, but I also think it's important in that plan to encourage the use of retail space for smaller local businesses and less for national chains. We don't need more bank branches on 2nd Avenue. We don't need more fast food outlets. What we need is more community businesses that can be sustained in the new economy of 2nd Avenue.
And this would have to come through Albany, though. These are things, and so when you're talking about a very, very localized issue like this, I mean, is that why we're seeing problems with this? Is that legislators from around the state are not necessarily going to go for this?
Well, look, I mean,
well, on Community Board 8, Second Avenue is often referred to above 79th Street as Little Times Square. So we have to think about the quality of life, and that people that live along Second Avenue, on Thursday night, they're late into the night, there's loud noise spilling out of bars. So we also have to think about what are we going to do to regulate people that are not in compliance and these businesses. So in addition to getting them help because they're suffering from the subway, we also have to think about the residents that live along there and the noise and the quality of life.
Well, I think. Look, that's certainly something we deal with at the community board. But in terms of the funding, in terms of businesses and creation, look again. All these issues, we live in New York City, the tying together of, it's like a course in federalism and civics, between the interplay between the federal government and the local. So you need to have everyone working together. Look, we saw Mayor de Blasio, I think, drive the agenda when he started talking about UPK. And, he got us to, I think, a great place where we all agree now statewide that UPK is something we need to be doing. And so I think we need to partner with the folks in the city to make it clear to the large delegation of New York State Assembly members who are in the 5 boroughs, just not the island of Manhattan, but that it benefits the entire city. And so I think that's the way you build consensus, but you also are able to drive the policy bus. Because look, let's be realistic. We are job applicants for a position that will be one of maybe 112 Democrats and 150 member assembly chamber. You have a pretty good idea in terms of on the totem pole where we're going to be, and in terms of how much seniority we have. So I think building consensus and a history of that kind of activity is helpful going to a body like that. And
it seems like the role of the assembly member, again,
exactly.
is you're in your community, constituent services, but then it's also about how you forge those relationships and work with folks in Albany. On the Second Avenue subway line, are there things you think need to be done differently?
The best way to help businesses is to deal with the increased rents. We need to have incentives for landlords, tax abatements, tax credits, a tax-free zone, and get the rent down to pre-construction even lower so they can be competitive. That's where the center of gravity is for these businesses, helping them able to pay the rent to stay in business.
So let's pick up on sort of this idea about being able to develop, having these relationships, being able to develop these relationships and push for what's important. What's most important, and what one or two aspects of your background, and I know a couple of you have hit on this before, but what makes you most qualified to be able to do that? Where you come from. Ed, you've spoken about your community board involvement. Do you want to pick up on that?
Look, I grew up, I was very fortunate as a youngster. My dad was director of the National Park Service in the 60s. So I watched him as a youngster back in that era. If you were quiet and no one really knew you were there, you got to watch the adults interact. And he put more units into the National Park System from 64 to 73 than anyone else. So I watched him up close working with legislators at the federal level. And when I was at Capitol Page, I watched them up close, and as a staffer on Capitol Hill. So I feel I've seen Washington, when it was actually working. I was a staffer when Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan had to work. We were going through Graham-Rudman, all of those things. So I think that background, in addition to now coming out and being on the community board, of seeing how government works, but then also being out here and knowing what needs to be done.
Rebecca, you in your experience, what prepares you most, would you say?
Well, I've been chief of staff to a state legislator for 5 years. I've worked for 2 congressmen. I've spent my entire life in public service. I've been a former assistant district attorney fighting against crime and an administrative law judge. I chair the board of the Feminist Press, which is the oldest women's book publisher in existence today, as well as the board of directors of the CUNY Law School, where I attended, the #1 public interest law school in the country. I've received a number of endorsements that have validated my candidacy. Our progressive, elected, effective leaders that we all know and trust, like Senator Liz Krueger and Scott Stringer and Gail Brewer, and I think that they are backing my candidacy because they know that I'm right on the issues and that I'm qualified and can get the job done.
But we're all right on the issues. We're all trying to out-progressive each other, and it's not a popularity contest, and I hate to see a few politicians pick the successor to Micah Kellner. But what makes me unique is I understand the community. I've been an activist for children, for seniors, for veterans. But what makes me most qualified, I understand the thousands of projects and initiatives that would have to happen on a local and state level. My last position working for the State Department in Iraq, I had a budget of $1 billion, and I was responsible for 2.5 million people. My staff was 85 people who had half with PhDs that focused on infrastructure, rule of law, governance, economic development, getting the banking system up and running, women's initiatives, projects to empower women. I can go to Albany. I have a broader background which I can relate to people. Our colleagues in Albany are not going to care who's the richest. They're not going to care who has the endorsements from people they don't care about. They want to know who can get things done and be effective as a leader.
You know, look, I have a lifelong track record of tremendous success in the private sector and also as a civic leader. I have worked on very deeply on critical business transactions, such as the General Motors restructuring, where we brought together a vast array of parties from government and private sector, and we did what was right for the American economy and for American workers, and achieved tremendous success with a tremendous amount of hard work. I've also been a civic leader for years. I'm standing up, I'm leading action on the Marine Transfer Station, but I've also been on more less street level civic issues. I've been on the board of directors of the New York Landmarks Conservancy for years, and we've been critically involved in the fight to preserve the city and suburban houses, the two large complexes in our district, the two largest affordable housing complexes in our district, and a lot of work on Roosevelt Island.
So we are running low here. We're going to move into closing statements. Each of you with about a minute to talk actually right into the camera, right into our audience, and give your sort of 1 minute elevator pitch. We're going to start with you, David, and go to Rebecca, and then Ed, and finish up with Gus again. And I will try my best not to have to cut you off, but if we could try to keep it to about a minute, the voters are yours. Yeah.
It's great to be with my colleagues here. We've had a great race running so far. What makes me uniquely qualified is my business experience, my mentoring of our children here in the city, and my experience abroad doing development, whether it's building a hydroelectric dam or making sure people have power, food, and empowered to vote. I'm going to go to Albany, and I'll be the most effective. I've got the management skills to implement the projects and initiatives that are important to the people in this district. I'm against the waste transfer station and got arrested 2 days ago protesting it. I understand the issues that our seniors have. My father's 92, and I know the challenges that seniors have, especially if they live alone. And I understand the issues of overcrowding of our schools. I'll go to Albany, I'll get the job done, and I've risked my life for strangers overseas. Now I'm very excited about going to Albany and representing the people I love.
Well, thank you again for having me here today. I am not from Wall Street. I'm not from corporate America. I'm from the community. I've raised my kids through the public school system. I am a proud PTA mom. I've stood on the ball fields at Asphalt Green for soccer day for my kids and for their schools. And I would just be so honored to represent the 76th District in the New York State Assembly. Yesterday, I was endorsed by the United Federation of Teachers, and I'm proud of these endorsements and the electeds that are behind my candidacy. I've been endorsed by the janitors, 32BJ, the healthcare workers, Local 1199, and I want to go to Albany to fight for reform, to pass campaign finance law, to team up with Senator Krueger, who's been a strong voice and a champion on that issue, as well as the Women's Equality Bill, more funding for our public schools, because I've seen firsthand as a public school parent the overcrowded classrooms and how it's not right to show up for a parent-teacher conference and all the parents be sent home at 8:30 because there's not enough staff and teachers to have that parent-teacher conference with your child. I want to fight for our seniors. My campaign treasurer is an 84-year-old woman. She's president of the Feminist Press, and she is doing a fabulous job. We're proud of this campaign. We've put together a strong team. I think what also distinguishes me from the others in this race is I'm not self-financing my campaign. I haven't written a large check to myself. We have a strong donor base of PTA moms, Democratic activists, and people that I'm very proud that traditionally haven't been involved in campaigns that have joined our team.
Well, thank you, Ben. Thank the League of Women Voters, and thanks to my colleagues for being here with me, and thank you all. Look, I'm glad we've had an opportunity to talk about community tonight a little bit, because we have life-altering, city-altering change coming down the pike for those of us who live in the 76th Assembly District. As we've talked about, the 2nd Avenue subway, the Marine Transfer Station. We didn't really talk about the development on York Avenue, but of course we alluded to the Cornell Tech project. These are life-altering projects and things that are coming online, and we need to be seeing those things firsthand, the issues they're going to be affecting. affecting you. And as a member of the community board these past 4 years, I have a record that no one else here can talk about with respect to standing up for you and talking about the issues about opening green space, our quality of life, the need for more middle school seats, the need for pre-K. As a member of the Youth and Education Committee, as a member of the Environment and Sanitation Committee, I've been out there talking about these issues, voting on them, saying one thing, doing the exact same, and I would like to do that for you in the Assembly. I think, I have a record of advocacy, and I would just like to point out, in terms of endorsements from the community, over 100 women community leaders have endorsed me. Over a third of the community board members are supporting me. Just last week, after the Roosevelt Island debate that we were at, the 4-term former president of the Residents Association on Roosevelt Island, Matthew Katz, endorsed me, in addition to former Congressman Peter Kostmeyer, who many of you know from the Citizens Committee for New York City, and the Americans for Economic Justice. So I think that the fact that those folks are validating the work that I've been doing here in the community for years, I think I would be the best representative and the best advocate for you in Albany. Thanks very much.
And Gus.
Thank you, Ben. Look, I think I have the best understanding of the needs of our community because it's my lifelong community. I was born in the 76th Assembly District. I'm a lifelong New Yorker. I'm the only candidate running for this office who's born in New York, who's lived in New York their entire life. I've had tremendous success in my own life. And what I see is that the kind of opportunities, the kind of education that I had is not available to enough people around New York. And I want to fight to change that. I want to fight against inequality. I want to improve educational opportunities, career opportunities, housing opportunities for all New Yorkers. And if elected, that's what I pledge to do. I also pledge to focus very deeply on the issues more locally affecting our specific community. I'm a leader on the opposition to the Marine Transfer Station. I will fight that fight to the death, and I believe that we will win because the facts are on our side, and that transfer station should not be built on 91st Street, and it should not be built anywhere. I am a lifelong New Yorker. I'm about to start raising my family right in our community, and I would love to have the opportunity to serve the people.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. It was a lively conversation. I'm sure that anybody looking for more information can find your individual websites, and we have links at the Gotham Gazette site and others to find those, and I'm sure that your constituents will see you out in the community working the streets. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you to the candidates for joining us today. For more information on New York City's 2014 elections, you can visit mnn.org or gothamgazette.com. You can also access candidate and polling information through the League of Women Voters of the City of New York's Vote411.org voter guide on their website at lwvnyc.org or by phone at 212-725-3541. I'm Ben Max of Gotham Gazette for the special election edition of Represent NYC on Manhattan Neighborhood Network.